My child, stop right where you are. Set down whatever has been pulling at your attention. Because what I am about to speak over you is not for a distracted heart. This is not background noise for you to half hear while your mind wanders elsewhere. This is a moment I have been preparing for longer than you know, and I need every part of you present for it. You have been waiting. I know this. I have watched you wait through mornings that felt identical to the one before, through nights where you wondered if anything was actually moving beneath the surface of your life. You have asked me, quietly, in the dark where no one else could hear, how much longer? You have wondered if the waiting itself meant something had gone wrong. If perhaps you had missed a door, misheard a timing, taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way. I am here tonight to tell you plainly. None of it was wasted. Not 1 hour. Not one silent season. Not one prayer that seemed to disappear into nothing. Every single day of your waiting has been doing something you could not see, and tonight I am going to show you what it was. You did not arrive at this message by accident. I do not deal in coincidence. You were led to these exact words at this exact hour, because I have been waiting for the moment. Your heart would be ready to receive what I am about to say. Stay with me. Do not let your mind drift toward the noise of your day. This is one of the most important conversations we will have this year. I want you to think back, just for a moment, to the season that has felt the longest. The one where you kept checking for movement and kept finding stillness instead. The one where you prayed the same prayer so many times it started to feel hollow in your own mouth. You wondered if I had stopped listening. You wondered if the door you had been standing before was ever going to open, or if you had simply been foolish to keep believing. Hear me now, my beloved. I was not absent during that season. I was not distracted, and I was not delayed by accident. I was building something in the very structure of your waiting, that could not have been built any other way. There is a kind of strength that only forms in stillness, a kind of readiness that only develops when a promise is held, just out of reach long enough for something inside you to grow strong enough to carry it. You have believed that waiting is empty space, a gap between where you were and where you wanted to be, a kind of nothing that had to be endured before the real story could begin. But I tell you plainly tonight, the waiting was the story. It was not separate from what I am doing in your life. It was the very method I used to prepare you for it. Think of what a farmer knows about a seed placed in the ground. From the surface, nothing appears to be happening. The soil looks the same on the first day as it does on the 30th. There is no visible progress, no daily proof that anything beneath the surface is stirring. And yet the entire future of that seed is being decided in that darkness. Roots are forming in a place no eye can reach. Strength is being built in soil, not in sunlight. If that seed were pulled up early to check on its progress, the very act of checking would destroy what was being formed. My child, you were the seed, and the waiting was the soil. What looked like nothing happening was actually everything happening, just in a place you could not observe. I know this has been hard for you to accept. You wanted proof along the way. You wanted a sign, a marker, some kind of evidence that the waiting was leading somewhere and not simply leading nowhere. I understand that longing. But faith that requires constant proof is not yet faith at all. It is simply agreement with what can already be seen. What I was asking of you during those long months was something deeper, trust extended into the dark, belief that did not need to see the root system to know it was forming. And you gave me that trust, even when it did not feel like trust. Even on the days you doubted, even on the nights you nearly gave up, something in you kept getting up the next morning and continuing to hope. That, my beloved, was not weakness. That was the very endurance I was cultivating in you all along. Let me show you something about the nature of delay that you have never fully understood. A delay is not always resistance. Sometimes it is precision. There is a difference between a door that will not open because it was never meant for you, and a door that has not yet opened because the timing has not yet arrived. You have spent so much energy wondering which one you were facing, wondering if perhaps the promise itself had been a mistake. A hope you had misunderstood or projected onto silence. I tell you now, it was not a mistake. It was timing. And timing, when it is mine, is never careless. I do not delay out of forgetfulness. I delay because certain things cannot be released, before the person receiving them is ready to carry them well. Some blessings, if given too early, would have broken under the weight of your immaturity in that season, not because you lacked worth, but because you lacked the readiness that only time could build. Consider what would have happened had I given you everything the moment you first asked for it. The relationships you were not yet ready to steward wisely. The opportunities you would have handled from a place of fear rather than confidence. The resources you might have poured into ground that was not yet prepared to hold them. I did not withhold these things to punish you. I withheld them because I loved you too much to hand you something you were not yet shaped to carry well. You are not the same person who first began this waiting. I want you to sit with that truth for a moment. The version of you who started this season was not ready for what I have been preparing. But the version of you standing here now, having walked through the waiting, having wrestled with the doubt, having kept believing. When belief made no earthly sense, that version of you is ready. The waiting did not delay your readiness. The waiting produced it. There is a particular kind of ache that comes with watching others receive what you have been hoping for while your own hands remain empty. I know you have felt this. You have watched someone else step into the very thing you had been praying for, and something in you wondered if perhaps you had been overlooked, passed by, forgotten in the queue of my attention. My child, hear me clearly. Their season was never your season. What arrived quickly for them does not mean you were denied. It means your path required a different shape entirely, a different pace suited to what I am specifically building in you. Comparison will blind you to the particular way I am working in your story. Every person's waiting has its own architecture, and yours was never meant to mirror anyone else's. Release the comparison now. Set it down completely. It was never a fair measurement to begin with, because I was never running the same timeline in two different lives. I want to speak now about what the waiting actually built inside you, because you have not yet seen the full shape of it. During the months you felt stuck, I was reshaping how you handle disappointment. You are no longer shattered by delay the way you once were. There is a steadiness in you now that was not there before, a capacity to hold uncertainty without being destroyed by it. That steadiness did not arrive by accident. It was forged specifically in the waiting, tempered the way metal is tempered, through sustained pressure over time rather than a single instant of intensity. During the season you felt forgotten, I was teaching you to recognize my voice apart from visible proof. You learned to sense my nearness in the stillness rather than only in the answered prayer. That is a rare kind of intimacy, my child, one that most people never develop because they never have to. The very silence you resented was building an ear in you that can now hear me in places others cannot. During the years you watched doors stay shut, I was clearing the ground behind those doors so that what waited on the other side would be ready to receive you when you finally arrived. You could not see this work because it was happening in rooms you had not yet entered. But every delay you experienced was matched by a preparation happening. On the other side of that delay, arrangements being made, people being positioned, circumstances being aligned, long before you ever walked through. I want you to understand something about how I build. I do not simply remove obstacles the moment you ask me to. I use the obstacle itself as the instrument of your becoming. The very thing that frustrated you, the waiting, the silence, the unanswered question, was doing something to you that a quick answer never could have done. Quick answers produce gratitude. Long seasons of waiting produce character. And character is what carries a blessing well once it finally arrives. Think of someone who receives sudden wealth without ever learning patience or stewardship first. How often does that wealth remain? Now think of someone who has walked a long road of discipline, of waiting, of learning to manage little before being trusted with much. When the increase finally comes to that person, it tends to stay, because the character to hold it was already built before the blessing arrived. My beloved, that is what I have been doing in you. I have not been withholding your breakthrough. I have been building the container strong enough to hold it once it comes. There is a question I want to address directly, because I know it has lived quietly in your heart for a long time. You have wondered whether the waiting meant I was displeased with you, whether perhaps your prayers were somehow insufficient or your faith too weak to move things faster. I want to remove that fear from you completely tonight. The length of your waiting was never a measurement of my approval or disapproval. It was never a scorecard on your worthiness. It was simply the amount of time required for the specific work I was doing in you and around you to reach completion. Some things take a season. Others take years. The timeline was never a statement about your value. It was only ever a statement about the complexity of the preparation. I also want to speak to the sorrow you carried over what felt like lost time. You have looked back at those years and wondered what you could have accomplished had things simply moved faster, had the door opened sooner, had the answer arrived without the long stretch of silence in between. My child, that time was not lost. It only feels lost when you measure it only by what did not yet happen, rather than by what was quietly happening beneath the surface the entire time. You gained things in that waiting that you could not have gained any other way. You gained a depth of prayer that only comes from praying without an immediate answer. You gained an understanding of your own resilience that you would never have discovered had everything come easily. You gained compassion for others walking their own long seasons because you now know, intimately, what that ache feels like. None of that would exist in you had the waiting been shorter. The very thing you resented was quietly making you into someone capable of holding what is coming, and capable of helping others hold their own waiting one day too. I want to tell you something about the nature of a promise that has not yet arrived. A promise delayed is not a promise denied. There is a wide difference between the two, and much of your ache has come from confusing one for the other. A denial means the door is shut permanently, that what you hoped for was never going to come. A delay means the door has simply not opened yet, and delay, unlike denial, always carries movement within it, even when that movement is invisible to you. You have been standing at a door for what has felt like an impossibly long time, hand resting near the handle, wondering if it would ever give way. I tell you tonight, the door has not forgotten you. It has not been sealed shut against you. It has simply been waiting for the precise moment when both you and what lies beyond it are ready for each other. That moment is closer than you think. There is something I need you to release before you can walk fully into what is coming. You must release the bitterness that has quietly gathered around the length of this waiting. I understand why it formed. Waiting that stretches longer than expected naturally breeds frustration, and frustration left unaddressed can harden into something colder, a low resentment toward the process itself, even toward me. My child, set that bitterness down now. It will not serve you in the season that is opening. Bitterness has a way of poisoning the very blessing it is standing near, souring gratitude before it has a chance to take root. Release it tonight, fully, so that when what you have waited for arrives, you can receive it with an open and clean heart, rather than a heart still nursing the wound of how long it took to get here. I also want to address the doubt that crept in during the hardest stretches of this season. There were nights you wondered, if you had misunderstood the whole thing from the beginning, if the hope you carried was ever truly from me or, if it had simply been your own wishful thinking dressed up as faith. I tell you now, the hope was real. It was placed in you by me, and I do not place hope in a heart that I have no intention of fulfilling. The very fact that the longing persisted through so much discouragement, through so many reasons to abandon it, is itself evidence that it was never merely wishful thinking. Wishful thinking fades under pressure. What I plant endures it. Consider the ground you have covered without fully realizing it. You are not the same person who began this waiting with such fragile hope. You have grown steadier. You have grown wiser about which voices to trust and which to release. You have grown more familiar with my presence in the quiet than you ever were in the noise of easy seasons. These are not small developments, my beloved. These are the very qualities that will allow you to walk well into what is now approaching. I am telling you plainly tonight that what was delayed is now beginning to move. I do not mean this as a vague comfort meant only to soothe you for a moment before returning to silence. I mean this as a genuine word for exactly where you stand right now. The season of waiting without visible movement is closing. What has been forming quietly beneath the surface for so long is preparing to break through into what you can finally see and touch and hold. You will begin to notice small shifts before the larger ones arrive. A conversation that unfolds differently than you expected. A sense of clarity appearing where confusion had settled for so long. An idea or an opportunity arriving as though it had been waiting patiently for the exact right moment to reach you. These are not coincidences, my child. These are the first visible signs of everything I have been building quietly during your season of waiting. I want you to understand that the return, when it comes, will not look identical to what you originally hoped for. I do not return things in their original form. I return them improved, shaped by everything the waiting produced in you, suited now for the person you have become rather than the person you were when you first began hoping for it. What felt delayed was never simply paused. It was being refined the entire time, refined alongside you, so that when it finally arrives, it will fit the life you are stepping into rather than the life you have already outgrown. I know there is a temptation now, standing this close to the end of the waiting, to rush ahead of me, to force open what has not yet fully opened on its own. I ask you not to do this. The same patience that carried you through the waiting must carry you through these final steps as well. What is being completed deserves to be completed fully, not hurried into an early and incomplete form simply because your patience has worn thin at the very end. There is a particular danger in the final stretch of a long wait, my beloved, and I want to warn you of it directly. It is in the last stretch that many grow weary and abandon the very thing they have carried faithfully for so long, right before it was about to arrive. Do not let exhaustion convince you to release your grip now, so close to the completion of everything you have carried. The nearness of the answer is not a reason to loosen your hold. It is a reason to hold on with everything you have left. I also want to speak to the fear that sometimes rises even at the promise of good news, the fear that says perhaps this too will disappoint you the way other hopes have in the past. I understand why that fear exists. You have been disappointed before, and disappointment leaves a mark that makes future hope feel dangerous. But I am not asking you to hope blindly. I am asking you to hope in me specifically, in the one who has been faithful through every part of this waiting even when you could not see the faithfulness clearly. My track record with you did not begin yesterday. It stretches back through every hard season you have already walked through and come out the other side of. Let that history inform your trust now. My child, I want to bless the waiting you have carried, not erase it from your memory as though it never happened, but actually bless it, honor it, recognize it as sacred ground rather than wasted time. Every tear that fell during that season watered something that is now ready to bloom. Every prayer that seemed to disappear into silence was heard and is now bearing fruit you are about to see. Every night you nearly gave up but did not was building the very endurance that is now carrying you across this final threshold. You have reached the end of a long road, my beloved. The horizon you have been looking toward for so long is becoming solid ground beneath your feet. The path behind you was difficult, and I will not pretend that it was not. But that particular stretch of the walk is finished now. What lies ahead is different. It carries the fruit of everything the waiting produced in you, and it is far closer than it has ever felt before. I want you to walk forward now, not with anxious striving, but with a settled confidence that the same faithfulness that carried you through the waiting will carry you into what comes next. You do not need to force this. You do not need to manufacture urgency or manipulate timing that belongs to me alone. You only need to keep walking, keep trusting, Keep believing exactly as you have been, because the waiting has already done its work in you, and what it built will not go to waste. There is something else I want to walk through with you before we reach the end of this word, because I know your mind will return to this message more than once in the days ahead. And I want it to hold everything you need. Let me speak now about the specific shape your waiting has taken, because not all waiting looks the same. And I do not want you to mistake what has been happening in you for something smaller than it actually is. Some people wait in obvious hardship, a struggle that announces itself loudly, that everyone around them can see and name. But your waiting has often been quieter than that. It has been the waiting of someone who looks, from the outside, as though nothing is wrong. You have smiled in rooms while carrying a weight no one else could see. You have answered, "I'm fine," more times than you can count, when the truth was far more complicated than that small phrase could hold. I saw every one of those moments, my child. I was not fooled by the smile, and I was never distant from the ache underneath it. This particular kind of waiting is harder in its own way, because it comes without the comfort of others recognizing your struggle. No one gathered around you to acknowledge what you were carrying, because no one else could see it clearly enough to name it. You walked through much of this season more alone than you let on, even to the people closest to you. I want you to know that I saw the full weight of it, every part you hid, every part you minimized so others would not worry, every part you carried silently so as not to burden anyone else. None of that silent carrying was invisible to me. I was present in every one of those private moments, closer than you believed possible. I also want to speak to the specific fear that surfaces when a long season is finally ending, the fear that says perhaps you will not know how to live differently once the waiting is over. This is a real thing that happens, my beloved, and I do not want it to catch you off guard. When someone has adapted to a long season of waiting, of holding their breath, of bracing for delay at every turn, the ending of that season can feel disorienting rather than purely joyful. You have built habits around the waiting. You have built a kind of emotional posture suited to a season that is now closing. And when the season shifts, some part of you may not immediately know how to exhale, how to trust that the bracing is no longer required. I want to prepare you for that disorientation now, so that when it comes, you recognize it for what it is rather than mistaking it for something being wrong. It is simply the process of learning a new posture after a long season of holding an old one. Give yourself grace in that adjustment. You do not have to instantly become someone who trusts easily after years of learning caution. That trust will grow, gradually, the same way the waiting slowly shaped you. Be patient with yourself in this next part the way I have been patient with you through the whole of it. I want to tell you something further about the people who walked alongside you during the waiting. Because not everyone, who is present during a season of delay is meant to continue with you into what comes next, and I know this truth carries its own kind of grief. There were some who stood with you faithfully through the hardest stretches, who prayed with you, who reminded you to keep believing when you had grown too tired to remind yourself. Honor those people, my child. Their presence in your waiting was not incidental. I placed them there deliberately, knowing exactly how much you would need them in exactly the moments they appeared. But there were also some who grew impatient with your waiting long before I was finished with it. Some who suggested you had misunderstood, that perhaps it was time to give up on what you had been hoping for, that your continued belief was naive rather than faithful. I want you to release any wound those words left in you. They spoke from their own limited view of your story, unable to see what I was building beneath the surface. Do not carry their doubt as though it were a verdict on your faith. Their inability to see what I was doing does not change what I was doing. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from believing something others have stopped believing with you. You may have felt, in certain seasons, as though you were the last one still holding on to a hope that everyone else around you had quietly abandoned. That loneliness was real, and I want you to know I never once left you to carry it by yourself, even in the moments it felt that way. Every time you continued believing when it would have been easier to release the hope entirely. Something was being recorded in the deepest part of you, a kind of spiritual muscle strengthening with each act of continued trust. I want to address one more thing before we close, because I sense a quiet question still sitting in your heart. You may be wondering, even now, whether this word is truly for you, or whether you are simply hoping it applies because you want so badly for the waiting to be over. My child, I understand that hesitation. But consider this. The very fact that these words are resonating in your spirit at this moment. The very fact that your heart recognizes something true in what has been spoken here tonight, is itself a form of confirmation. I do not waste words on hearts that are not ready to receive them. If this message has found its way to you and settled into your spirit rather than sliding past you unnoticed, that is not an accident. That is recognition. Something in you already knew this before I said it, and tonight I am simply putting language to what your spirit has been sensing quietly for some time. I want to leave you with a picture before we close, my beloved. Think of a long winter, the kind that stretches far longer than anyone expects, where the ground stays hard and nothing visible grows for months at a time. To someone standing in the middle of that winter, it can feel as though growth has stopped entirely, as though the earth itself has given up on producing anything new. But beneath that frozen surface, roots are still spreading. Life is still gathering strength in places no eye can observe. And then, without dramatic warning, the ground begins to soften. The first small shoots break through, tentative at first, easy to miss if you are not watching closely. And then, within what feels like a short span of time, everything that seemed dormant bursts forward all at once. As though the whole season of waiting had simply been gathering itself for this one moment of release. You are standing at the edge of that kind of spring, my child. The winter you have walked through was long, longer than you would have chosen if the choice had been yours to make. But it was never wasted. It was never empty. It was the very process that is now producing what you are about to see break through into your life. Do not measure the worth of that winter by how difficult it felt while you were in it. Measure it by what is now emerging because of everything it quietly accomplished. Carry this with you as you step forward from this message. Every hour of waiting mattered. Every moment of doubt that you fought through mattered. Every prayer that felt like it disappeared into silence was received, was counted, and is now bearing the fruit you are finally about to hold. You did not wait in vain, and you are not waiting in vain even now in these last remaining moments before what has been forming finally arrives. Hold steady. The waiting is nearly finished, and everything it built in you is about to prove its worth. Declare this with me now, my child. Say, my waiting was never wasted. Every season, every silence, every long night, was building something in me that could not have been built any other way. I trust what was formed in the waiting, and I trust the one who was forming it. Say it, and let it settle fully into your spirit tonight.